Urgent, personnel change. Jenna Field's termination, effective immediately. That's the email that popped up on my phone while I was giving my father's eulogy. My mother-in-law had just fired me during my dad's funeral. I'm standing at the podium of St. Mark's Community Church. 80 people are staring at me, waiting for me to finish honoring my father's memory. And my phone is buzzing with a company-wide termination notice from Avery Marston, who happens to be both my boss and my husband's mother. I force my voice to stay calm. Years of handling PR crises kicked in while I continued my eulogy. My dad, Robert Fields, never had it easy. But he worked hard, so we didn't have to. He gave us every opportunity he could. My phone kept buzzing. More notifications flooded in. My husband David's face went dark as he read his phone from the front pew. Other mourners started checking their phones too. My clients, industry contacts, board members. Everyone was seeing it in real time. I gripped the podium and finished. Thank you for honoring his memory. The second I stepped down, David was beside me, furious. Behind him, Avery glided over in her designer black dress, silver hair perfect, wearing a satisfied smile. David read from his phone, voice shaking with rage. Due to concerning behavior and mental health instability following a family tragedy, Jenna Fields has been terminated as Chief Communications Officer, effective immediately. Mental health instability. At my father's funeral, my assistant Maya had already texted me. She's telling clients you had a breakdown. Your building access is gone. Passwords changed. I'm so sorry. Jenna, darling. Avery's voice was dripping fake sympathy. You're clearly not stable enough for this work. We've already secured all client contacts and system access. It's for the best. David stepped between us. Now's the time to mourn your dad. Don't worry. There are big things ahead for you. I watched Avery accept condolences from mourners who had no idea she'd just destroyed my career during my father's eulogy. Her smile said it all. She thought timing it this way would break me. She was wrong. And she was about to find out just how wrong. Let me back up and explain why this firing was the biggest mistake of her life. I'm Jenna Fields. I was the Chief Communications Officer, the number 2 at Marston & Associates, one of New York's biggest PR firms. But I wasn't just any executive. I was known as the crisis surgeon of Manhattan. While other firms just managed damage control, I performed miracles. I took completely destroyed reputations and made them stronger than they were before the scandal even happened.
How?
I had a secret weapon called the Integrity Database. It was a system I'd built over 5 years that didn't just track current problems. It predicted scandals months before they broke. Here's how powerful this was. I called our biggest client, James Miller, 3 weeks before his company's discrimination lawsuit went public. By the time the story hit the news, he'd already fired the problem executives, implemented new diversity programs, and positioned himself as a reform leader. The scandal actually made his company more valuable. Another client, Dr. Sarah Kim, was facing a career-ending malpractice lawsuit. Instead of the usual deny and deflect strategy, we did something radical: complete transparency. We reviewed everything, improved hospital protocols, and created a patient safety initiative. She became the face of medical accountability reform. This was my philosophy: build genuine trust through transparency, not manipulation through fear. And that's exactly what Avery hated about me. See, Avery built her career on old-school tactics: intimidation, buried stories, backroom deals. I built mine on something she couldn't understand: actual competence and ethical relationships. Our elite clients didn't just pay me, they trusted me with their legacies. And Avery thought that by firing me, she could just redirect that trust to herself. She had no idea that kind of trust can't be transferred. It has to be earned. And she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. She's always hated you, David said as we sat in his car outside the church. But I never thought she'd go this far. David knew his mother better than anyone. Here's the thing about Avery Marston. She wasn't born rich. 33 years ago, she was just Avery Collins, a middle-class secretary who married the firm's founder, Richard Marston. She hired a private investigator when we got engaged, David told me, gripping the steering wheel. Spent months trying to find dirt on you. Anything to prove you weren't good enough for our family. But here's what drove her crazy. They found nothing. My dad's factory work, my mom's teaching job, my student loans, everything was completely respectable. And that clean background made her hate me even more. You represent everything she can't stand, David explained. You earned your success through actual skill, not connections. And here's the worst part for her. My father respected you more than he respected her. That hit me. Richard Marston, the firm's founder, saw himself in me. Someone hungry and talented who didn't compromise on quality. Before he passed away, he promoted me to be the company's number 2. In 5 years, I'd achieved what Avery had spent 30 years trying to get. Genuine respect from the people who mattered. I was living proof that she'd taken shortcuts to get where she was. And she thought firing me would eliminate that competition. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Here's what every PR professional in Manhattan expected. Jenna Fields would immediately fight back. Angry social media posts. Frantic calls to clients. A very public war with Avery that would dominate industry gossip for months. I did the opposite. I completely disappeared. For 30 straight days, I went silent.
No social media. No interviews.
No public statements. When reporters called, David just said I was grieving and needed time with family. The industry went crazy with speculation. Where was Jenna? Why wasn't she defending herself? Maybe Avery was right about the mental breakdown? But here's what I was really doing. I visited every place my father loved. His favorite diner where he ate breakfast before those dawn factory shifts. The community center where he coached Little League for 20 years. The park bench where he read the newspaper every Sunday. To everyone watching, I looked like a grieving daughter. In reality, I was channeling something much more dangerous. Strategic rage. She's expecting you to react emotionally, David said during one of our evening walks. The second you fight back publicly, you prove her point about being unstable. Don't give her that satisfaction.
He was absolutely right.
Avery timed this for maximum emotional damage. She wanted me to lash out and validate her story. But crisis management had taught me something crucial. The most powerful response isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes silence creates the most devastating noise. Every day I stayed quiet, the questions got louder. If Jenna was really unstable, why were her biggest clients calling her directly? If she was incompetent, why couldn't anyone access her systems? My silence was becoming Avery's nightmare. And here's where things started falling apart for her. My friend Maya, who still worked as an assistant at the firm, was giving me inside information. And it was brutal. Day 3, James Miller's office called asking specifically for me. Avery told them I was unavailable due to health issues. Day 7, my integrity database crashed completely. The IT department couldn't fix it without my passwords. 3 major client reports just stopped. Day 12. Isabella Peterson's confirmation hearing prep fell apart because nobody could find the research files I created. Day 18. Dr. Sarah Kim's crisis plan collapsed mid-execution. Without proper management, the media coverage spiraled out of control. Avery called you 17 times yesterday. Maya texted me. The board members are starting to ask serious questions. The numbers told the whole story. 47 missed calls from Avery in the first week. 73 calls in week 2. By week 3, she was calling me twice every hour. She's trying to guess your passwords, Maya reported. Started with your family names, then birthdays, anniversaries. Nothing's working. She's brought in 3 different IT experts. They can't crack your system. Here's the beautiful irony. Avery built her entire career on who she knew and how she could manipulate people. But my value was based on what I actually knew and could do. You can't inherit technical skills or buy genuine relationships. She keeps telling clients the database will be fully operational soon, Maya continued. But I'm recording every lie, every excuse, every panicked phone call. She's completely falling apart. The woman who fired me during my father's eulogy was now desperately begging for my help. And every day I stayed silent. That desperation doubled. On day 28, David and I walked through a small office space in Greenwich Village. Perfect rent, great location, and most importantly, it felt like a completely fresh start. Silence and strategy. I said, testing out the name. What do you think? David smiled. I love it. What's the concept? Instead of managing crises after they happen, we prevent them. Instead of spinning scandals, we build genuine strength. I looked around the empty space. Everything Avery's firm isn't. David's legal background helped me figure out the business side. Your contract with Marston has restrictions, he explained, but only if you're directly competing for existing clients. If clients come to you on their own, you're completely protected.
Perfect.
Because I had zero interest in poaching clients. My approach would be totally different, attract people who actually valued substance over connections. While Avery was frantically trying to crack my password-protected systems, I spent those final silent days building something revolutionary. First client meeting is tomorrow, I told David as we locked up my future office. Who? I smiled for the first time in weeks. James Miller. Apparently, he's been waiting for me to come back. The 30 days of silence were about to end. But Avery's nightmare? That was just getting started. And here's where everything changed. James Miller showed up at my Greenwich Village office exactly 31 days after the firing. He had a leather briefcase and the careful look of someone who'd been burned by traditional PR firms before. I've been waiting for you to resurface, he said, sitting across from my desk. What Avery did at your father's funeral told me everything I needed to know about her character. I opened the portfolio I'd spent a month perfecting. James, this isn't about competing with traditional crisis management. This is about making crisis management completely obsolete.
How?
Reputation forecasting. We spot threats 6 months early and stop them before they become problems. Integrity auditing. We find issues before your enemies do. Transparent strength. We build your reputation on real accomplishments, not buried secrets. James leaned in. But what if a crisis actually hits? We use it to make you stronger than you were before. No spin, no lies, no shady tactics. Just authentic leadership and smart transparency. 2 hours later, James signed a 6-figure contract. Word spread fast through his network. Tech executives who were sick of Avery's intimidation tactics started calling. Within 3 months, Silence and Strategy had 5 major clients and a waiting list. Here's the beautiful part. I wasn't stealing anyone from Marston and Associates. My rule was simple. I only worked with clients who came to me naturally. I never actively went after Avery's people. I didn't need to. The difference between our approaches was doing all my marketing for me. You're not just building a business, David said one evening as we looked at new client proposals. You're starting a revolution. He was right. We weren't competing with traditional PR. We were completely replacing it. But the real viral moment came 6 months later. James Miller held a press conference about his company's diversity program. A reporter asked him about his previous PR firm. I worked with Marston and Associates for 3 years, James said carefully. But I realized I needed someone who could help me actually become better, rather than just manage damage control through questionable means. That phrase, questionable means, exploded across every industry publication within hours. It was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. And it started a domino effect. Dr. Sarah Kim announced at a medical conference that she'd switched to a firm that focuses on ethical transformation instead of traditional crisis management. Then Judge Isabella Peterson mentioned in a legal journal that her confirmation success came from proactive integrity consulting rather than reactive damage control. Each client who left made it public. Professional. Pointed. Nobody mentioned Avery by name, but the message was crystal clear. There was a better way to handle reputations. She's losing clients left and right. Maya texted me. The Blackstone family just fired them. Board members are calling emergency meetings. Industry publications went crazy. Articles about the new ethics of reputation management and why traditional crisis PR is dead started appearing everywhere. My name was in every single piece, always contrasted with Avery's outdated intimidation tactics. Avery's firm wasn't just losing business, it was becoming the perfect example of what not to do in modern PR. The woman who fired me during my father's eulogy was watching 30 years of work crumble as clients ran toward the ethical approach she'd always called naive. But what happened next would prove that her old tactics weren't just failing, They were about to spectacularly backfire in a way that would shock the entire legal community. If you want to see how a federal judge's career gets destroyed by the exact methods that made my client stronger, hit that like and subscribe button now. You're about to witness the most devastating comparison in crisis management history. By the 6-month mark, the industry had split into two clear camps: firms adopting my proactive transparency model and firms still clinging to Avery's reactive manipulation tactics. The results were undeniable. When a discrimination lawsuit hit one of my tech clients, we responded with immediate policy changes, executive accountability, and a public commitment to systemic reform. The scandal made him a leader in corporate responsibility. Meanwhile, when similar accusations hit one of Avery's remaining clients, they followed her playbook: deny, deflect, attack the accusers. The company's reputation was destroyed, the CEO resigned in shame, and stock prices crashed. The pattern is everywhere, Maya reported during one of our secret coffee meetings. Your clients are emerging stronger from crises. Avery's clients are being annihilated by them. Trade publications began documenting the divide. PR Week ran a cover story titled "The Integrity Revolution," featuring before and after case studies that painted a stark picture. Ethical reputation building worked, and traditional crisis management was not just outdated, it was actively harmful. Avery's desperate, Maya continued. She's trying to copy your methods, but she doesn't understand the philosophy behind them. She's offering transparent communication while still using intimidation tactics. Clients see right through it. The woman who'd built her career on connections and manipulation was learning a harsh lesson. In the age of social media and instant information, authenticity couldn't be faked. She'd fired me thinking my ethical approach was a weakness she could exploit. Instead, she'd unleashed a revolution that was making her entire business model extinct. The funeral firing that was supposed to destroy me had become the catalyst for transforming an entire industry. And this was just the beginning. The call came at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. Isabella Peterson, the federal judge I'd helped confirm 6 months earlier, was facing her worst nightmare: accusations of plagiarism in law review articles she'd written 20 years ago as a young attorney. Anonymous sources had leaked photocopied pages to 3 major publications simultaneously, highlighting passages that appeared lifted from obscure academic papers. The timing was surgical, designed for maximum damage during her first major Supreme Court case. Isabella had stayed with Avery after our public split. Now that decision was about to destroy her career. Avery's response was textbook old-school crisis management: attack, deflect, bury. Within hours, Avery's team launched countercharges against the anonymous sources, claiming they were disgruntled law clerks with personal vendettas. They hired investigators to find dirt on the journalists breaking the story. They pushed conspiracy theories about political opposition research. The accusations are baseless and politically motivated, Avery declared in a press conference, Isabella standing stiffly beside her. We will aggressively pursue legal action against anyone spreading these lies. The strategy backfired spectacularly. By day 2, the journalists had produced additional examples, not just from Isabella's law review articles, but from legal briefs she'd filed throughout her career. Each aggressive denial from Avery only inspired deeper investigation. Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons. Legal scholars who'd initially defended Isabella began distancing themselves. Bar associations launched preliminary inquiries. Stop attacking and start explaining, David urged during one of my evening updates. He'd been monitoring the coverage from his public defender's perspective. But Avery doubled down. She hired a digital firm to flood social platforms with pro-Isabella content while simultaneously launching whisper campaigns against her critics. The tactics were so transparent and desperate that they became part of the story. By day 5, 3 more Supreme Court justices had quietly requested Isabella recuse herself from pending cases. Legal blogs were calling it the most bungled crisis response in judicial history. On day 7, Isabella Peterson submitted her resignation letter to the federal court. The woman who could have had a distinguished judicial career was now facing potential disbarment hearings. Traditional crisis management just destroyed a federal judge, the Washington Post editorial read. When will the legal community learn that transparency beats intimidation? The industry was watching. And everyone understood exactly whose tactics had caused this spectacular failure. 3 days after Isabella's resignation, Dr. Sarah Kim was facing nearly identical accusations, plagiarism allegations in research papers from her residency 15 years ago. Someone had clearly studied Isabella's downfall and decided to test whether my methods would work any better. The difference was Sarah Kim was my client. I called her within an hour. "Sarah, we're going to do something that will feel counterintuitive, but I need you to trust me." Instead of denying or deflecting, we went immediately on the offensive, not against the accusers, but against the problem itself. Sarah voluntarily commissioned an independent academic integrity audit of every paper she'd ever published. We announced it publicly before the accusations could gain momentum. "If there are problems in my past work, I want to know about them first," Sarah stated in a carefully crafted video message. "Patient safety depends on scientific integrity, and I take that responsibility seriously." The audit found 3 instances of inadequate citations, minor academic oversights that would have been devastating if discovered by opponents, but appeared refreshingly honest when disclosed voluntarily. Sarah's response was immediate and comprehensive. Public acknowledgement, corrected citations sent to all relevant journals, and a $500,000 research fund established to support rigorous peer review processes. "I made mistakes as a young resident," she explained in follow-up interviews. "But hiding from those mistakes would make me the wrong kind of doctor and the wrong kind of leader." The media narrative shifted completely. Instead of a plagiarism scandal, the story became about professional accountability and scientific integrity. Medical journals praised her transparency. Hospital administrators held her up as an example of ethical leadership. Within 2 weeks, Sarah Kim was invited to speak at 3 major medical conferences about research ethics. Her reputation wasn't just restored, it was enhanced beyond where it had been before the accusations. The contrast with Isabella Peterson's destruction was stark and intentional. Industry publications ran side-by-side analyses showing how identical crises had produced opposite outcomes based purely on response strategy. "Ethical transparency versus traditional deflection," read the Harvard Business Review headline. "Why one federal judge lost everything while one surgeon gained respect." The message was unmistakable. Avery's methods didn't just fail, they were actively harmful in the modern information age. Meanwhile, Isabella Peterson didn't want to go down alone. Desperate to salvage something from her destroyed career, Isabella had secretly recorded her final strategy session with Avery. The audio was devastating. "I don't care what really happened with those papers." Avery's voice was crystal clear. "You're going to testify under oath that you never saw those sources. Memory gaps from 20 years ago, stress of judicial confirmation, whatever. Just deny everything and stick to the script." "But Avery, if they have more evidence?" "Then we destroy their credibility before they can present it. I have investigators digging into every journalist, every source, every law clerk who might have leaked this. We burn them all." Isabella had refused to commit perjury, leading to the spectacular public breakdown that ended her career. But she'd kept the recording as insurance. By Thursday afternoon, it was in the hands of every major legal publication in the country. The New York State Bar Association announced a formal investigation within hours. Suborning perjury wasn't just unethical, it was a felony. Prominent PR executive caught instructing client to lie under oath dominated Friday morning headlines. Legal experts called it the most clear-cut case of professional misconduct they'd seen in years. Avery's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. and didn't stop. Board members remaining clients, industry contacts. Everyone wanted explanations she couldn't provide. By 3 p.m., she was calling me. "Jenna, please, we need to talk." Her voicemail was barely controlled panic. "This is all being taken out of context. You understand crisis management. You know how these things get twisted." 8 more calls followed that evening, each one more desperate than the last. The woman who'd fired me during my father's eulogy was now begging for the help she'd so cruelly denied me. The New York Times called on a Monday morning. "Ms. Fields, we'd like to do a profile piece. The Daughter of Integrity, How One Woman is Rebuilding PR from the Ground Up." The resulting article, published 3 weeks later, revealed what I'd been quietly building behind the scenes. While the industry focused on my client successes, I'd been working with Columbia Journalism School and the Public Relations Society of America to develop new ethical standards for the profession. Fields has been consulting with ethics boards at major universities, the Times reported, helping develop curriculum that emphasizes transparency over manipulation, authentic relationship building over intimidation tactics. The article detailed my collaboration with media literacy programs, my work with journalism schools on crisis communication ethics, and the preliminary framework for what would become industry-wide reform. Traditional crisis management relies on information control, I was quoted as saying. But in the digital age, authenticity is the only sustainable strategy. The piece ran with devastating sidebar coverage of Avery's legal troubles. The New York State Bar hearing was scheduled for the following month. She faced potential disbarment, criminal charges for suborning perjury, and civil lawsuits from clients whose reputations she destroyed through questionable tactics. Former allies abandoned her systematically. Board members resigned from Marston and Associates, citing fundamental disagreements about professional ethics. Industry contacts stopped returning her calls. Invitations to professional events dried up completely. She's completely isolated, Maya reported on one of our calls. Avery is considering shutting down the firm entirely. 30 years of work gone. The transformation was accelerating beyond what I'd imagined possible. PR firms across the country were advertising ethical reputation management and transparent crisis communication. My Brooklyn office was fielding calls from Fortune 100 companies wanting to future-proof their reputation strategies. The woman who'd fired me for being ethically naive was now watching that same ethical approach revolutionize her entire industry. Avery Marston arrived at my Greenwich office on a gray Thursday afternoon, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the imperious confidence, the designer power suits, the air of untouchable authority. She wore a simple black coat and carried herself like a woman facing the end of everything she'd built. "Jenna," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where James Miller had launched my new career 18 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "The bar hearing is next week. My attorney says your testimony could make the difference between suspension and complete disbarment." She clasped her hands to stop them shaking. "You're the only person in the industry with enough credibility to what? Lie for you." David appeared in the doorway before she could answer. I texted him the moment she arrived, knowing this conversation needed a witness. "Mom." His voice was cold. "Interesting timing. Jenna's father's funeral anniversary was last month. Did you send a card?" Avery looked between us, finally understanding the depth of what she destroyed. "David, please. This isn't about old grudges." "Old grudges?" David stepped fully into the room, his public defender's instincts taking over. "You told me Jenna wasn't good enough for our family. You fired her during her father's eulogy because you couldn't stand that Dad respected her more than you." I watched Avery's face crumble as her son continued. "Turns out it wasn't that Jenna wasn't good enough for us. Our family wasn't good enough for her." David moved to stand behind my chair, his hand on my shoulder. "She's revolutionizing an entire industry while you're facing criminal charges." For the first time since I'd known her, Avery Marston looked genuinely ashamed. "I know I made terrible mistakes." "You didn't make mistakes," David interrupted. "You made choices. For 30 years, you chose intimidation over integrity, manipulation over authenticity. And when someone showed you a better way, you tried to destroy them." Avery stared at her hands. I was scared.
Threatened.
Everything was changing, and I didn't know how to. "You were never threatened by change," I said quietly. "You were threatened by accountability." "I'll testify at your hearing," I said, watching hope flicker in Avery's eyes. "But not to save your career. To ensure the industry moves forward properly." Her hope dimmed. "What do you mean?" "I'll testify truthfully about your methods, your impact on clients, and why the old way of doing business needs to end." I leaned forward. "But I'll also testify about the potential for redemption, if you cooperate fully with reforming industry standards." "Cooperate how?" "Complete transparency about your tactics. Full cooperation with the new ethical guidelines we're developing. And a public apology." Not to me, but to every client whose reputation you destroyed instead of rebuilding. Avery's face went pale. That would mean admitting to years of malpractice. Yes. I kept my voice steady. Isabella Peterson. The Blackstone heir before I fix what you broke. Every client who trusted you with their legacy and got manipulation instead of genuine help. David watched his mother process the choice: complete professional humiliation or total professional destruction. The bar will suspend me for years, she whispered. Probably. But suspension isn't disbarment. You could eventually rebuild differently ethically. I paused. Or you can fight this, get disbarred, and spend your remaining years facing criminal charges. The silence stretched for 2 full minutes. Outside, Brooklyn traffic hummed past the window of the office, where I'd built something better than everything she'd tried to destroy. If I agree to your terms, Avery said finally, will you? Can you help me figure out how to do this right? David squeezed my shoulder gently. That's your decision, he murmured. I looked at the woman who'd fired me during my father's eulogy, who'd tried to ruin my career out of class anxiety and professional jealousy. She was broken, desperate, and finally ready to face consequences for 30 years of toxic behavior. I'll help you learn how to rebuild reputations instead of managing damage, I said. Starting with your own. Avery nodded, tears finally falling. I accept your terms. All of them. All of them. The New York State Bar hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Industry executives, journalists, and legal professionals crowded every seat, knowing they were witnessing either the destruction or redemption of one of PR's most controversial figures. Avery Marston took the witness stand looking nothing like the imperious woman who'd fired me during my father's eulogy 2 years earlier. Her voice shook as she began the most honest testimony of her professional career. For 30 years, I built my reputation on information control, client intimidation, and what I euphemistically called aggressive crisis management, she said, reading from prepared notes with trembling hands. I instructed clients to lie under oath. I buried evidence of wrongdoing. I destroyed the careers of journalists and whistleblowers who threatened my clients' interests. The room was dead silent as she detailed specific cases: bribes paid to suppress stories, NDAs used to silence assault victims, smear campaigns against ethical competitors. Each admission was a nail in the coffin of her career, but also a foundation stone for industry reform. I told Isabella Peterson to commit perjury because I believed winning mattered more than truth. I destroyed her judicial career to protect my own reputation. Avery's voice broke completely. I fired Jenna Fields during her father's funeral because she represented everything I was afraid to become: competent, ethical, and genuinely respected. The media explosion was immediate. Traditional PR executive exposes decades of industry corruption, dominated headlines for weeks. Trade publications called it the most significant moment in PR history since Edward Bernays invented the profession. When my turn came to testify, I spoke not about revenge, but about reconstruction. Avery Marston's methods represent everything our industry must move beyond. But her willingness to face consequences honestly gives us the foundation to build something better. The bar suspended Avery for 3 years and mandated 200 hours of ethics training. Her career was effectively over, but the industry transformation had officially begun. Ethical reputation management isn't just possible. I concluded my testimony. It's the only sustainable future for our profession. 6 months after the hearing, the Public Relations Society of America announced the adoption of the Field Standards, comprehensive ethical guidelines named after my father, not me. Robert Fields represents the integrity foundation every PR professional should build upon, the PRSA president announced at the industry conference, where I delivered the keynote address. His daughter simply showed us how to apply that foundation to modern reputation management. The standards required dramatic changes: mandatory transparency in crisis communication, prohibition of intimidation tactics, whistleblower protections for employees who reported unethical behavior, and regular ethical auditing for all member firms. Universities began integrating the field standards into their communications curricula. Columbia, Northwestern, and Syracuse launched specialized tracks in ethical reputation architecture. My Brooklyn office became an unofficial training center for graduate students learning the new approaches. We're not just changing how PR works, I told the graduating class at NYU's communications school. We're ensuring that future generations never have to choose between professional success and personal integrity. The systemic changes made toxic behavior increasingly difficult to hide. Transparent reporting requirements, mandatory client outcome tracking, and industry-wide accountability measures created what Maya called the integrity immune system. "Your father would be proud," David said one evening as we reviewed applications for the new Robert Fields Ethics Fellowship. "His factory work values are literally rebuilding an entire profession." The irony was perfect. The man who'd worked double shifts to send his kids to college had become the namesake for professional standards that would protect millions of people from the kind of manipulation he'd never had the privilege to encounter. His integrity was living on through systemic change that stretched far beyond anything I could have achieved through simple revenge. 2 years to the day after Avery fired me during Dad's eulogy, I stood in the same church where it all began. This time, I wasn't delivering a speech about loss. I was receiving an award from the New York Press Club for excellence in ethical communications. Silence and Strategy now employed 32 people and had a 7-month client waiting list. Harvard Business School was developing a case study about our proactive reputation model. 3 competing firms had launched ethical transformation divisions trying to replicate our success. "You turned the worst day of your life into the beginning of everything," David observed as we drove home through Brooklyn, the award resting between us on the car seat. He was right, but not in the way most people understood revenge stories. I hadn't destroyed Avery Marston. She destroyed herself by clinging to tactics that were already obsolete. I'd simply built something better, while she doubled down on what was already failing. "Strategic patience," I said, echoing the lesson Dad had taught me about working double shifts for long-term goals. "Sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemies defeat themselves while you build the future." Our marriage had grown stronger through the crisis. David's family relationships had improved after he finally stood up to his mother's toxicity. Even Avery, now working part-time for a small nonprofit after completing her ethics training, seemed genuinely committed to making amends. She asked if she could visit Dad's grave. I told David. "She wants to apologize to him directly." "What did you tell her?" "That he'd want her to honor his memory by helping other people instead." The personal victory wasn't about Avery's downfall. It was about building a life and career that Dad would have been proud of, grounded in the same work ethic and integrity that had defined his factory years. Success built on ethical foundations felt completely different from success built on defeating enemies. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, you've witnessed the power of reconstruction over destruction. 2 years ago, I could have fought Avery publicly, exposed her tactics immediately, and probably destroyed her career through media warfare. The old Jenna, the one raised on factory floor values of immediate justice, wanted exactly that kind of satisfying destruction. But strategic patience taught me something more powerful. True victory isn't about tearing down your enemies. It's about building something so much better that their old way of doing things becomes irrelevant. The funeral firing that was supposed to destroy my career became the catalyst for transforming an entire industry. Avery's cruelty inadvertently launched the most significant ethics reform in PR history. Her attempt to humiliate me during my father's eulogy led directly to professional standards being named after his integrity. Dad's factory work ethic, showing up every day, doing the job right, building something that lasts, turned out to be exactly what a corrupt industry needed. His values didn't just guide my personal response to betrayal, they became the foundation for systemic change that will protect future generations from the kind of manipulation Avery specialized in. The field standards now govern how hundreds of firms operate, how thousands of professionals are trained, and how millions of people experience crisis communication. That's a legacy worth more than any personal revenge. When someone tries to destroy you at your most vulnerable moment, you have a choice. Spend your energy tearing them down, or use that energy to build something better than what they tried to take from you. I chose to build. And in building ethically, I didn't just win. I made sure future victims would have protections I'd never had. Here's my question for you. If someone betrayed you at your most vulnerable moment, could you show the same strategic restraint? Because here's what I've learned. The desire for immediate revenge is natural, but the discipline to build long-term change is what separates temporary satisfaction from lasting victory. Every industry, every workplace, every community has people like Avery Marston, individuals who've built their power on manipulation, intimidation, and ethical shortcuts. They survive because good people either enable them through silence or exhaust themselves fighting battles that don't create systemic change. The alternative is what my father taught me through 30 years of double shifts. Show up consistently, do the work ethically, and build something that outlasts the people who tried to tear you down. Your betrayal story might not involve PR firms and bar hearings. Maybe it's a toxic boss, a manipulative colleague, or a corrupt system that's tried to destroy your career or reputation. The principles remain the same: strategic patience, ethical action, and building the solution rather than just fighting the problem. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences turning betrayal into opportunity. How did you transform your worst professional moment into the beginning of something better? What industries or systems have you helped change through ethical action rather than reactive revenge? Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about strategic patience winning over immediate satisfaction, and share this if you know someone who needs to understand that building from the ashes of betrayal is always more powerful than just fighting the people who lit the fire. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's reconstruction on your own terms, with your values as the foundation.